The mess line snaked across the courtyard, boots crunching into the sun-scorched earth of Camp Ashwood. The heat frayed nerves, making tempers flare and banter bite harder than usual. Sarah Mitchell stood in line with the others, her sleeves rolled just above her wrists, revealing the faint outline of a dragonfly tattoo on her forearm. It was enough to draw the eyes of a cluster of infantry soldiers behind her. One let out a loud smirk, muttering, "What's she gonna do? Buzz the enemy into submission?" The words sparked a wave of laughter, sharp and mocking, rippling through the group. Sarah didn't turn, didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead, tray steady in her hands, her silence a shield. They thought they had her figured out. A quiet logistics clerk, nothing more. They were wrong. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these tales of courage, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from today. Private First Class Sarah Mitchell was 28 years old, assigned to the logistics division at Camp Ashwood. Her world wasn't firefights or night raids. It was clipboards, manifests, and towering stacks of supply reports. While others trained for combat, she ensured they had the gear to survive it. Every morning, she arrived early, boots polished to a mirror shine, her bunk in the female barracks squared away, her paperwork flawless. She never raised her voice, never complained, never cut corners. If a shipment went missing, Sarah tracked it down. If a report was due, she'd finished it the night before. But to most infantrymen, her efforts were invisible. To them, she wasn't a fighter, wasn't real army. She was just another supply clerk, someone they didn't picture in the field, someone whose quiet presence they could dismiss without a second thought. The contrast was stark. The men who mocked her were loud, brash, convinced worth was measured in calluses and combat patches. Sarah was the opposite, soft-spoken, steady, humble. She didn't boast about past deeds or push back against their jibes. She simply endured them. And then there was the tattoo, a single dragonfly, black ink etched across the pale skin of her forearm. To most, it seemed out of place on a soldier, delicate, feminine, a decoration that didn't belong beside a uniform and dog tags. In the mess hall, whispers always followed when someone noticed it. "She get that on a beach vacation?" Someone would mutter. "What's she gonna do? Flap it at the enemy?" The laughter never seemed to faze her. Sarah never explained, not once. She kept her sleeves rolled just high enough for the ink to stay visible, whether out of stubbornness, pride, or something deeper, no one could tell. To her fellow soldiers, it was a punchline. To Sarah Mitchell, it was something else entirely. The first time it happened in front of a formation, Sarah told herself it didn't matter. They were standing in the courtyard for a routine briefing when Sergeant Daniels caught sight of her tattoo. He smirked, then turned to the entire group, raising his voice for all to hear. "Check this out," he said, grabbing her wrist and holding it up like a trophy. "Private Mitchell thinks she's at a nature retreat." "What's this supposed to be, Mitchell? Your spirit insect?" A ripple of laughter spread through the ranks, soldiers nudging each other, eyes glinting with amusement. Sarah didn't pull her arm back. She stood still, eyes locked forward, jaw tight, letting the silence sit heavy between them. Sergeant Daniels eventually dropped her wrist and moved on, but the moment lingered. To the soldiers watching, she was an easy target, a clerk who didn't belong in their world of grit and glory. The mockery followed her like a shadow, but Sarah kept her composure, her dragonfly tattoo a quiet defiance she never explained. One sweltering afternoon, two soldiers leaned against a Humvee in the vehicle bay, cigarettes dangling from their lips, watching Sarah Mitchell stride past with a clipboard in hand. "I'll put 20 on it," one said, loud enough for her to hear. "She couldn't load this truck without breaking a nail." The other chuckled, nodding. "You're on. No way she even knows where the tie-down points are." Sarah kept walking, her pace steady, her expression unchanged. She didn't flinch, didn't snap back. But in the reflection of the Humvee's side mirror, her eyes flashed with a brief, burning intensity before softening once more. She disappeared into the supply depot, the soldiers' laughter trailing behind her like dust in the heat. The taunts grew sharper in the mess hall. Sarah balanced her tray with her usual care when a private brushed past too close, nudging her arm. The tray slipped, clattering against the floor, food scattering across the tiles. The hall erupted. Some jeered, one soldier clapping sarcastically. "Nice work, Mitchell," he called out. "The enemy's gonna surrender now for sure." Sarah knelt, gathering the pieces one by one, her hands steady, her breath slow and deliberate. No curses, no anger, just silence. Specialist and Gwen bent down to help, but Sarah shook her head, a quiet refusal of pity. She finished cleaning, left her tray behind, and took a seat at a corner table alone. That became her routine, alone at meals, alone at the supply desk long after others had retired to their bunks. The lights in her office glowed late into the night, her pen scratching across paper. Soldiers passing by caught glimpses of her hunched over letters, sealed in neat stacks but never mailed. No one knew who she wrote to. No one asked. The silence might have consumed her entirely if not for the visiting unit. One afternoon, a convoy rolled into Camp Ashwood, dust clouds swirling in the wake of a SEAL team detachment arriving for joint training. Hardened men stepped off the vehicles, weapons slung low, eyes scanning every detail. They noticed everything. And when they saw Sarah Mitchell being mocked at the edge of the courtyard, when they observed the way laughter shadowed her every step, they didn't join in. They watched, studied. Something about her, something about the dragonfly ink on her forearm, caught their attention. They said nothing, not yet. But from that moment, Sarah was no longer invisible. She was being observed. The days blurred into one another at Camp Ashwood. For most, it was routine. For Sarah Mitchell, it was a test of endurance, not of combat, but of silence. Yet every so often, cracks in her quiet facade appeared, subtle but undeniable to those who looked closely. The first clue emerged one evening when Corporal Lee passed by the female barracks. Sarah's locker door stood open, revealing a single photo taped inside. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a group of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in a desert. But the faces were blurred, either by sand or intentional smudging, and a faint detail caught his eye, a patch on a sleeve, half hidden but unmistakable to anyone familiar with special operations. Corporal Lee lingered, squinting at the photo in Sarah Mitchell's open locker in the female barracks. Before he could examine it further, Sarah closed the locker door with quiet finality, her expression unreadable. The second clue lay in her tattoo itself. Under the harsh floodlights of the vehicle bay, the dragonfly ink revealed more than delicate wings. Thin lines wove through the design, barely noticeable, etching numbers into the pattern. Coordinates, unit digits, something precise hidden in plain sight. The soldiers who mocked her never saw it, but a visiting SEAL, leaning against a Humvee one night, caught the detail. His gaze lingered, his expression shifting subtly. He said nothing, but when Sarah noticed his eyes on her arm, she tugged her sleeve down without a sound. The third clue emerged in the supply depot. A late shipment arrived, crates of weapons fresh off the line. Technicians gathered, prying lids open, cataloging serials. Sarah, clipboard in hand, stepped forward and rattled off the model, weight, and specs of each rifle before the men had even finished unsealing the cases. "Mitchell," Technician Carter said, staring. "How the hell do you know that?" She shrugged, her voice calm. "It's on the manifest," she replied, though everyone knew the paperwork hadn't been touched yet. These were not accidents. They were fragments of a life Sarah never spoke of, buried beneath her quiet demeanor. The men who mocked her saw only silence and a dragonfly. Those who looked closer glimpsed shadows of something far more dangerous. An inspection came without warning. Late one afternoon, word spread that Captain Hayes was making surprise rounds through the vehicle bay. Soldiers scrambled, tightening straps, wiping grease, aligning gear in perfect rows. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly at her desk, clipboard at the ready. Captain Hayes's gaze swept the room, landing on her. "You?" he said, pointing. "Private Mitchell, step forward." The room stilled. Sarah obeyed, her boots clicking against the concrete floor. The captain picked up an M4 carbine from a nearby rack and held it out. "You're logistics, right? Paperwork, supplies. Let's see what you really know." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. This wasn't a fair test. Everyone knew Mitchell wasn't combat arms, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She accepted the weapon with steady hands. "Disassemble it," Captain Hayes ordered. Sarah glanced at the rifle once, then set it on the table. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a strip of cloth, tying it around her eyes to blindfold herself. Gasps echoed through the vehicle bay. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, bolt, firing pin, extractor, laying the weapon out piece by piece in perfect order. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The clicking of metal against the table was the only sound in the room. In less than 2 minutes, the M4 lay stripped bare before her. Technician Carter, standing nearby, folded his arms and muttered, "I've seen guys take 5 times that long." Sarah pulled the blindfold off, blinked once, and began reassembling the weapon. Her movements were fluid, deliberate, the final click of the magazine snapping into place like a punctuation mark in the silence. She slid the rifle back across the table to Captain Hayes, her expression neutral, as if the demonstration were routine. The captain's face remained unreadable, but the soldiers around her exchanged glances, their murmurs quieter now, tinged with something new, curiosity, perhaps, or unease. Sarah picked up her clipboard again, resuming her work as if nothing had happened. But in that moment, the cracks in her carefully maintained silence had widened, and no one in the vehicle bay could ignore the truth. Sarah Mitchell was more than she seemed. The convoy rolled into Camp Ashwood just after dawn, tires grinding against the tarmac, heat already shimmering from the ground. A SEAL team detachment stepped out, disciplined, silent, carrying the weight of operations most would never know. At their front strode Commander Torres, a man hardened by decades of service. Sarah Mitchell stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled high as always, revealing the dragonfly tattoo on her forearm. She was unnoticed, just another figure in tan fatigues, scribbling tail numbers, checking manifests, her head bowed to her task. Commander Torres's gaze swept the courtyard, sharp and searching, until it locked on Sarah's arm, the dragonfly. He stopped walking. The operators behind him halted, their boots falling silent on the blistering concrete. The commander stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, as if he couldn't quite believe what he saw. Sarah looked up, startled, but held her ground, fingers tightening around her clipboard. Then, without a word, Commander Torres straightened his shoulders and raised his hand in a crisp salute. The air shifted instantly. Soldiers nearby froze, their trays, tools, and words stilled. Silence spread across the courtyard like a wave. A whisper rippled through the ranks. Why is he saluting a clerk? No one dared laugh now. Commander Torres's voice carried, low but firm. "You're still with us, Mitchell?" Sarah gave the smallest nod. And just like that, the truth cracked open. Sarah Mitchell was no ordinary supply clerk. Years earlier, she had served as an embedded intelligence officer on a mission so classified that most records didn't exist. Her call sign was never spoken aloud. Her dragonfly tattoo was no mere decoration. It was a mark known only to a handful of survivors from an operation where Sarah's intel had saved dozens of SEALs from certain death. The symbol was borne in silence by those who returned, and Commander Torres, standing before her, was one of them. He held the salute, and for the first time since Sarah arrived at Camp Ashwood, every mocking voice fell silent. The salute lingered, an unbroken moment stretched taut with respect. Then Commander Torres lowered his hand and turned to the gathered soldiers. His voice was steady, weighted with memory. "You think she's just a clerk?" he asked. "You think that tattoo is a joke?" No one answered. No one dared. The commander's gaze swept the formation. "Years ago, in a ravine most of you will never hear about, we were trapped, outnumbered, pinned down, minutes from being wiped out. The only reason I'm standing here, the only reason any of us made it home, was her." Commander Torres pointed to Sarah Mitchell. She stood frozen, caught between humility and dread, her clipboard pressed tight against her chest. She hadn't been on the ground with a rifle or pulling a trigger, but the intel she fed the team, the route she mapped, the code she cracked, the call she made in the dark, it turned the tide. His men lived because of her. A deeper hush fell over the courtyard. The soldiers who had mocked her in the mess hall shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering in their eyes. Commander Torres stepped closer to Sarah and raised his hand again, the salute crisp, sharp, unmistakable. This time, it wasn't just his. One by one, the SEAL operators behind him followed, their hands rising in unison. Then the Army officers joined, followed by the enlisted soldiers, who had once laughed at her dragonfly tattoo. Boots snapped together, hands rose to brows, the air electric with respect. Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't smile, didn't break. She returned the salute with a quiet steadiness that shook them all the more. For a heartbeat, hardened warriors honored the woman they had dismissed, the Dragonfly Inc., once a target of mockery, now a banner of sacrifice and survival. It was a moment no one at Camp Ashwood would ever forget. When the salute ended, the courtyard remained silent. No one spoke, no one moved, as if breaking the moment would be a form of disrespect. Commander Torres lowered his hand, his voice softening. "You've earned more than silence, Mitchell. They should know who stands among them." Sarah shook her head gently, her words barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing my job, sir." And that was the end of it. No grand speech, no demand for recognition, just the same quiet discipline she had always shown. From that day forward, no one mocked her. No one joked about the Dragonfly ink on her arm. The men who had laughed now stood a little straighter when she passed, their voices quieter, their eyes respectful. In time, whispers of her deeds spread, fragments of truth carried from one soldier to another. She never confirmed or corrected them. She didn't need to. Sarah Mitchell became a quiet legend at Camp Ashwood, not because she sought it, but because respect had finally found her. The moral was clear. True strength isn't loud. Sometimes, the quietest warrior carries the deepest scars and the highest honors. If this story moved you, do show your support. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. For more military and veteran stories, we bring you tales of courage, sacrifice, and honor. Stories that remind us of the quiet strength carried by those who serve. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.